The Flipside, Disc 5.
Reframing redundancy. When ITV and Granada received approval for their proposed merger in October 2003, employees of both companies knew that redundancies would follow. One of the staff at Granada, Gemma Stone, was more than a little concerned when she heard the rumours. "I had one child under 2, she says, and I was pregnant with another. I couldn't help but ask myself, who is going to employ me now?" But Gemma is not a person to be easily beaten. "I took stock of the situation," she says, and realised that there was an opportunity in my misfortune. This was her chance to pursue her dream of running her own events management company. "When I started the business, my former boss at LWT reminded me of something I'd said in my original job interview," she remembers. "When asked what I wanted to be doing in 5 years' time, I had said that I wanted to be running my own event agency. To be honest," Gemma admitted, "it was something I just said in an interview. I hadn't really thought much about it, but it had obviously stuck with me somewhere in my unconscious mind." Gemma set up her own events management company, Rock and Ruby Event Management, in 2004, and successfully pitched to a number of high-profile clients, including Tesco, IKEA, and Granada. Building a new business from scratch is never simple or easy, but Gemma succeeded. Today, she enjoys the positive aspects of working from home and having the freedom to spend quality time with her family rather than having to adhere to a strict 9-to-5 time frame. When she looks back to the time she lost her job, Gemma is in no doubt that there was a huge flip side. She says now that, all in all, it was a blessing. "The experience I have acquired running the agency would have taken years working for one employer. The vast range of events I've had the pleasure of producing, working with so many people, it has been fabulous." With the current economic downturn in the UK, the events management industry has been among the first to be affected, presumably because events are often perceived as a luxury rather than a necessity. But Gemma remains optimistic about the future. Whatever happens, she always looks for an opportunity, and she is confident that she can turn any negative into a positive. In the summer of 2008, to safeguard her business from the predicted recession, she launched a children's party division as a new alternative revenue stream. This new arm to her business, she said, took off with unprecedented speed. "I'm an optimist," Gemma says. "I'm also a doer. I get frustrated by people who moan about their lot in life but do nothing about it. I truly believe that you create your own destiny, and with visual goals, you really can achieve anything you go out there to accomplish." Successful people always look to reframe a negative situation. They ask positive, empowering questions that look to the future. And it is those questions that point to the opportunities hidden in the problem. Reframing is a relatively simple process. It is achieved by taking a negative statement, like, "losing my job is a disaster," and flipping it into a positive statement like, "this is a great opportunity for me to review what I really want to do with my life." There's a lovely story of a little boy who dreamed of being a baseball player. He went out into his garden with bat and ball to play. "The final inning!" he shouts aloud, but to himself. "The home team are 2 runs down, but the away team are batting and the bases are loaded. Can the batter hit a home run and win the game?" The boy tosses the ball into the air and swings the bat at it with all his might, but misses. "Strike 1, he calls. "The batter has 2 more tries to win the game." Once again he tosses the ball, swings and misses. "Strike 2, shouts the little boy. "Now, with all eyes on the batter, he will surely hit the home run on his 3rd try." For the last time, the boy tosses the ball in the air, swings the bat, and misses for a 3rd time. The force of his final swing makes him fall to the ground. As he gets up, dusting himself down, the boy picks up the ball and says, "Man, what an incredible pitcher!" The 2008 U.S. presidential election was being battled between John McCain, a 72-year-old Republican, and Barack Obama, a young black American representing the Democrats. Their ages were factors that both camps brought into their campaigns. The Republican camp suggested that Obama was too young and inexperienced. They argued that McCain had the experience and wisdom needed to govern the most powerful nation in the world. The Democrats, on the other hand, put a different frame on the candidates' ages. They pointed to the fact that, statistically, there was a good chance that McCain would be dead before the end of his term. While Obama was young and relatively inexperienced, he had youth, energy, and enthusiasm on his side. The fact that Obama hadn't had a great deal of experience in government, they said, meant that he was ideally suited to bring about much-needed change. Which frame was true? They both were. It just depends upon the frame you want to put around them. The painful lessons of a professor. The explosion came suddenly and without warning. A blindingly bright white light, followed by a surge of flame and then smoke. Dan Ariely was trapped in a room that was fast becoming a furnace. He was just 18 years old, and he was on fire. With the fire all around him, Dan realized that the only way out was by going through the flames. Someone called from outside the room, and the voice guided him to the fire escape. He rushed through the flames to the exit. When he reached the door, his clothes were on fire. He tore off his shoes, T-shirt and trousers, and was left standing in charred socks and underwear. Looking down, he saw his injuries for the first time. His right hand was completely black. Large pieces of skin hung loosely from his left arm, and the whole arm had turned white. The stone floor was covered with the ash that was his skin. Then unbearable pain overcame him. All he could do was lie motionless on the floor, focused on his breathing, waiting for help. Months after his accident, Dan Ariely stood in front of a full-length mirror for the first time since his accident. His legs were covered in bandages. His back bent forward, and his arms, also bandaged, were collapsed by his sides. My twisted body looked foreign and detached from what I felt and knew was me, he said. The worst was my face. The whole right side was open flesh, yellow and red from pieces of tissue and skin hanging from it. It looked as if it were made from colourful wax that was in the process of melting. My eyes were pulled severely to the side. The right side of my mouth and nose were charred and distorted, as was my right ear. 70% of his body had suffered third-degree burns in the accident, and it would require 3 very long years of hospitalization and treatment involving intense physical pain and emotional anguish. Ariely describes his treatments and reflects on his accident and how it affected his life in a very moving personal essay, Painful Lessons. Every day for 3 years, with the exception of the days of his operations, Ariely was given the bath treatment. He would be lowered into a purple-coloured disinfectant, and as soon as he was completely soaked, nurses began ripping off the bandages. They would continue ripping away at the bandages one at a time until they were all removed, which would usually take them an hour or so. It was, Ariely says, daily agony. When the nurses had finished, they would lift him out of the bath and apply a layer of Civarol ointment and rebandage his body. There would also be physiotherapy and other treatments. But every day during his 3 years in hospital, at the back of his mind was the dread of the next bath treatment. In the introduction to his best-selling book, Predictably Irrational, Dan alludes to the fact that he started to look at life, and in particular people's behaviours, differently after his accident, and this led him down a career path that he may not have chosen before the accident. After he was released from hospital, he pursued a degree in cognitive psychology at Tel Aviv University and went on to receive an MA and a PhD in the same field from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. He then earned a doctorate in business from Duke University, where he is currently the James B. Duke Professor of Behavioral Economics. Today, Dan is widely acknowledged to be a leading figure in the field of behavioral economics, which studies the human, social, cognitive and emotional factors that influence economic decisions, and how those factors affect market prices, returns on investment, and the allocation of resources. However, his main fascination is in observing and measuring how and why we make the decisions that we do in our lives. He has shown that our decisions are often completely irrational, but at the same time, they are surprisingly predictable. He has uncovered some fascinating insights about the things that influence us when we make decisions, and how they affect our lives generally. When I spoke to him, I found Dan Ariely to be a warm, generous man, happy to share his thoughts and experiences. He has some interesting personal and professional insights relating to the idea of the flip side. There is no question, he says, that big changes in our lives change us as people. They change what we think about and what we care about. In his own life, he acknowledges that there were fundamental, long-term positive changes in his life that he can trace back to his accident, including changes to my personality, the way I view myself, the way I view others, my motivation, my interests, and my reaction to physical pain. He goes on to explain that the experience gave him a more relaxed perspective of life. Knowing how horrible life can be makes the small daily problems I encounter seem less important, if not meaningless. He attributes a large part of his motivation to pursue an academic career to the changes in his view of the world following the accident. It was a powerful, painful, and prolonged experience, he says. But it has also provided one of the most central threads to the way I understand myself and others, and it has also sparked many of my research interests. I hesitate to use the term burn victim when referring to Dan Ariely. He certainly doesn't view himself as a victim. He is both philosophical and pragmatic about his experiences. Overall, he says, I try to look at my injury as another experience, one of many that compose my life. Would he be the same man that he is today? Would he have achieved the things he has achieved in his life so far, had the magnesium flare not erupted and caused such horrific burns all those years ago? Of course not. Because, as Ariely says, it is the big events that change us. He is not certain whether his life is better than it would have been had he not had his injury. The 3 years of agonizing pain were just too much, he believes. However, he does acknowledge that there were advantages, there were positive changes. There was most definitely a flip side. Today he has a beautiful wife, and he's at the height of his profession, as well as being a best-selling author. Even after going through excruciating pain every day for 3 years, and having to live with pain and restricted mobility every day, and even after having to cope with the social and emotional strains that are inevitably put on someone who suffers a severe burn injury, Ariely discovered that there were a few advantages. In retrospect, he says, it is surprising to see how positively my life has turned out. I think it has turned out to be better than others expected, and definitely better than I myself expected. Whatever setbacks and changes happen, whether we are hit by a health problem, a financial crisis, or a serious disability, the testimonies of people like Jody Plishka, Gemma Stone, and Dan Ariely reveal a vital aspect of the flip side. When we learn to ask more empowering questions and reframe situations in a positive light, we often discover that things work out better than we might otherwise have anticipated. Chapter 11. Lost Dreams and New Directions. Finding the Future. The future belongs to those who believe in the beauty of their dreams. Eleanor Roosevelt. It was billed as the story of a man who had everything but found something more. In the film regarding Henry, Harrison Ford plays Henry Turner, a successful high-powered lawyer who, after being shot in the head and chest, suffers brain damage. Both his speech and mobility are affected, and the injury causes severe amnesia. With most of his memory gone, Henry has to rebuild his life from scratch, which includes relearning everything from being able to walk and tying his shoelaces to learning to read and write. There is a particularly poignant scene in the film when Henry's physical therapist, played by Bill Nunn, comes to visit Henry at his home in Manhattan. Henry's physical therapy had finished weeks earlier, but the therapist, who had become Henry's friend and confidant, following his injury, had been told that Henry was feeling depressed about the life he had lost. In the scene, Henry gets his friend a beer and the two men sit down in the kitchen and talk. The therapist tells Henry how he used to be a professional football player and describes what happened in the last professional game he ever played. The ball was coming his way for a touchdown when he was tackled on two sides. At that moment, he heard and felt his knee pop, and he knew there and then that his football career was finished. "My life was over. I was dead," he tells Henry. "But ask me if I mind having bad knees." Shrugging his head, Henry starts to repeat the question. "Okay. So, do you mind?" When the therapist interrupts him, No, I don't mind, Henry. Not for 1 second. Check it out. You're walking, you're talking, we're sitting here drinking this pretty fine expensive beer. And I had something to do with that. So no, I don't mind having bad knees." That one scene summed up the message of the film. Even when dreams are lost, there can still be a flip side, and often that flip side will come in the form of new, different, and far more significant dreams. Those who thought the central theme of the storyline in regarding Henry was something confined to Jeffrey Jacob J.J. Abrams' script need only read Tricia Mailey's book I Am the Central Park Jogger, discussed in Part 1, to appreciate that the film's message merely echoes what is possible even in far worse real-life tragedies. Julio Iglesias' road to pop stardom, following the loss of his dream to become a professional footballer, is just one of many examples of how lost dreams can be superseded by new, bigger dreams. In Iglesias' case, nobody could have blamed him if he had become bitter, resentful and depressed after his accident. He could have dwelt on the fact that life had cheated him and taken away his boyhood dreams. But instead, Julio Iglesias chose a different path. He chose to focus forward and embarked upon a specific course of action which ultimately led to his success as a singer-songwriter. Even though Julio Iglesias' childhood dream was crushed, he was able to find a flip side and, like Harlan Sanders, go on to achieve things that he may never have even dreamed possible had he not had his original dream taken away. In fact, many of the greatest achievers in all walks of life are people who had lost their dreams, but who went on to pursue new dreams. The music goes on. You are never too old to set another goal or to dream a new dream. C.S. Lewis. By all accounts, Elaine Rinaldi was something of a child prodigy. At the age of 7, she was tapping out Chopin melodies on a Japanese kawaii baby grand piano in her parents' Westchester living room. Even at that age, Elaine would practice 3 or 4 hours a day, and so it wasn't surprising to those that knew her when she started winning local and state competitions. Elaine's piano teacher, Dr. Rosalina Sackstein, a renowned music professor at the University of Miami, described Elaine as one of the most talented students I had. And Dr. Sackstein went on to clarify that she only ever worked with people that have the talent, the intelligence, and the disposition. When Elaine was 16 years of age, she made her professional debut as a concert pianist with the Fort Lauderdale Chamber Symphony. In 1985, she received a Silver Knight Award for music. Her immediate family, as well as her grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, and friends, were all in the audience. Her father, Leo, recalled the occasion with pride. "You think, well, there are so many talented kids out there, but she won." Elaine went on to attend the Eastern Musical Festival, one of America's most prestigious centers for aspiring young musicians. She later received a full scholarship to attend the Frost School of Music at the University of Miami, where she continued to study with her childhood teacher, Dr. Sackstein, before earning a master's degree at Mann's College of Music in New York City. It is fair to say that Elaine Rinaldi had worked hard all her life and made considerable sacrifices to achieve her dream of being a respected concert pianist. After receiving her master's degree, Elaine finally realized her dream. But the dream didn't last long. Less than 12 months after her graduation, she was hit by a car while out riding her bicycle on the streets of New York. The dream she'd nurtured and worked for all of her life was over. The accident devastated Elaine, physically, mentally, and professionally. The damage to her upper body made it impossible for her to continue to play the piano at a professional level. All those hours of practice over the years, many times as much as 8 hours a day, going back to childhood, would account for nothing. Or so it seemed at the time. It took Elaine a year to recover from her injuries. But when she finally got back on a bicycle, she was hit again, this time by a rollerblader. Her lifelong teacher and mentor, Dr. Sackstein, said of Elaine, "She had all the workings of a concert pianist, all the ability and all of the talent. Unfortunately, things happen." But Elaine's story does not end there. She stayed in New York and in the music business, only she found a new calling, orchestral conducting, and it wasn't long before she began to excel. In 1997, Elaine was hired as the resident assistant conductor and chorus master for the Florida Grand Opera, which was home to the Florida Philharmonic. She admitted that she would have taken a job anywhere, but this was her hometown, and she described it as the ultimate coming home. In 2000, Elaine went back to New York to work as a freelance conductor for the Da Capo Opera, and later, the same year, she returned to South Florida to work in Key West at the Island Opera Theatre. There she was reunited with many of her old friends from the Florida Philharmonic, which, she was sad to discover, had dispersed due to lack of funds. Some of the musicians suggested that Elaine create a new orchestra. She was the ideal person for the job. Not only could she lead the orchestra, but she had the contacts to help make it happen. "We have excellent musicians in South Florida," she said, "and if we put them together, we have an excellent orchestra." In 2006, Orchestra Miami was officially formed. The 40-strong orchestra performed at the Miami-Dade County Auditorium, the very same place that Elaine was awarded her Silver Knight Award. "It's all coming home for me," she said. Elaine Rinaldi had lost her dream only to pursue and achieve another, in many ways, bigger dream. For her to command an orchestra is the epitome of my expectations, said Dr. Sackstein. Good for her. Creating the future. I look to the future because that's where I'm going to spend the rest of my life. George Burns. What begins to emerge from these stories is that there may be some truth in the belief that if we lose a dream, it can always be replaced with a new dream. When dreams are lost, when our life's endeavours are taken away, we can become bitter and resentful, and we can curse and moan about the unfairness of it all. Or we can look forward and find another dream. The truth is, very often, if we choose the latter, we will find an even bigger, more meaningful dream. Occasionally, it may resurrect old dreams, dreams that we may have given up on long ago, but have been lying dormant within us, waiting to be reclaimed. Kim Williams was the fourth of 8 children in a family that loved music. By his 7th birthday, he could play the guitar, and when he was 10, he was already writing his own songs. As a teenager, he played in a number of cover bands and travelled across the American Midwest. But eventually he returned to East Tennessee, fell in love, started a family, and decided to do the responsible thing and get a real job. After a series of construction jobs, he accepted a position as an industrial electronics technician at a local glass factory. Any ambitions he had to pursue a career in music, he managed to set aside, and instead devoted his time to raising his family. Life for Kim and his family was routine but comfortable, until one day in 1974, an accident at the factory changed the course of his life. Kim was caught in a horrific fire inside the factory. His burns were so severe that over the following decade, he needed more than 200 plastic and reconstructive surgeries. A lot of the treatment was undertaken at the Vanderbilt University Medical Center in Nashville, and it was there that he came across details of a songwriting class at the University of Tennessee campus. He signed up for the class and found that it resurrected his love of music and songwriting. Even though he'd been working towards a degree in psychology, Kim decided that what he really wanted to become was a songwriter. He spent the next 5 years travelling back and forth between East Tennessee and Nashville, learning the craft of writing songs and occasionally pitching his work. Finally, in 1988, Kim was given a contract with Tree International, which became Sony ATV Music Publishing. Within his first few months, Joe Diffie, a country and western singer, recorded a song Kim had co-written called "If the Devil Danced in Empty Pockets." The song became a major hit and launched Kim Williams within the industry as a recognized songwriting talent. Kim had already been working with a young country and western singer called Garth Brooks, and the two struck up a friendship and writing partnership that would last decades. Since then, Kim has enjoyed a long string of hits with some of the leading stars on the country and western scene, the most notable being 3 Wooden Crosses, which he co-wrote with Doug Johnson and was recorded by Randy Travis in 2003. That song was voted Song of the Year at the 2003 Country Music Awards and received the same award from the Nashville Songwriters Association. Doug Johnson says Kim Williams is the most positive, high-energy person he knows. "I really wish everyone could have the opportunity to be around him," Johnson said. "He is a huge inspiration." Reflecting back to the time of his accident, Kim Williams believes that it revived his aspirations to become a songwriter. "I don't know if I'd ever have gotten back into music if I hadn't had that accident," he said in an interview. "Maybe it was God saying, 'I've got to hit him hard enough to get him to go where he needs to be.'" One of the biggest flip sides of a trauma is that it forces us to have goals. A lot of the time, people drift through life with no real idea as to what they really want. Sometimes, as in Simon and Helen Pattinson's story mentioned in Part 1, people instinctively know that something is missing and actively start looking for goals. Simon and Helen were young lawyers, commuting every day into the City of London, until they got to the point where they knew they needed to find something that would inspire them. For many people, it takes a setback or trauma before they come to that same realization, and sometimes it is the trauma itself that gives people goals to pursue in life. Once you have a specific goal, you're more than halfway to achieving it. I first heard Roger Crawford speak in 1996. He speaks slowly and deliberately and with great humour. His audiences hang on to every word. Not because Roger is quite severely physically handicapped, but because he has great wisdom to share. And when he spoke, audiences would come away feeling inspired. Roger was born with a congenital birth defect known as ectrodactyly. He had 2 fingers on his left hand and 1 on his right hand. He has 3 toes on his right foot, and his left leg was amputated. Yet Roger qualified as a tennis coach with the United States Professional Tennis Association. He's got a bachelor degree in communications from Loyola Marymount University in Los Angeles. He was the first severely handicapped person to play in the National Collegiate Athletic Association, and he became a sought-after motivational speaker. Probably the most important message that Roger Crawford shared was the importance of having specific personal goals. Anyone can do incredible things, he said, but first, you've got to give yourself incredible things to do. If you were to ask 100 people if they had goals, or what things they most wanted to achieve in life, over 90% couldn't give you anything specific other than their wish to be happy and healthy. This is what Nathalie Dutoit, winner of 10 gold medals in 2 Paralympics, who we will meet in a later chapter, refers to as the great tragedy of life. One of her most precious possessions is a piece of prose given to her by her coach, the sentiment of which she lives her life by. The tragedy of life does not lie in not reaching your goals. The tragedy of life lies in not having goals to reach for. Having goals gives our lives purpose and meaning and direction. It is also one reason why people who suffer personal tragedies often come through the tragedy feeling happier and more fulfilled. Every day represents new challenges and new goals. And, most often, the individual will have specific long-term goals too. Without a goal, we are like a ship bobbing up and down on the open sea. In May 2008, I took a week off to go on a day skipper sailing course. It was probably the hardest thing I've ever done. Other than the first afternoon, which I spent hanging over the side, it was an incredible experience. With 2 friends and an instructor, I sailed across the Strait of Gibraltar to North Africa, visiting the Spanish inlet of Ceuta, and then on to Morocco, before heading back across the Mediterranean Sea through the night to Sotogrande on the Costa del Sol. One of the most difficult parts of a day skipper course is calculating your journey, because there are so many factors that have to be taken into account. Aside from the various complexities relating to the boat itself, there are the tides, the current, the wind, waypoints, visual markers to check your location, the weather, and the forecasts. Yet before you can look at any of these factors, the very first thing you must have, and without which there is no point in leaving the harbour, is a destination. You have to know where you want to go, or you'll never make it anywhere. Once you know where you want to go, you then plan a route. You check out the weather forecast, the tides, the sea current and the wind. You plot your course, noting waypoints along the way that will confirm where you are at any given time, and providing everything is okay, you set sail. Once out at sea, if circumstances change, if the wind changes direction, if a storm hits, or if something blocks the route, the skipper, knowing his destination, plots a new course and resets the sails. It takes time and a considerable amount of effort, but that way the skipper can be confident of reaching his destination. If life is a journey, how many of us have destinations? How many know even in what direction they want to go, or what the waypoints are? Most school leavers don't have a clue even as to the type of work they would like to do, and that is the real tragedy of life. Too many people settle for making a living instead of making a life. Sometimes it takes a crisis or even a tragedy before we stop drifting, and as Mike Yetta so aptly said, start living consciously. Calling 911. Brian Gettinger credits his helmet with saving his life in a motorcycle accident in September 1993. He was 23 at the time, and just 3 weeks from graduating from the Sinclair Police Academy, when he crashed his father's motorcycle after misjudging a bend. "I wasn't supposed to survive the crash," he said. His body was thrown against a guardrail, crushing his spine, breaking his back in 3 places along with several ribs. As he lay helpless and severely injured along the side of the road in Ohio, Brian Gettinger's only thought was, "I'm not going to be a police officer anymore." Gettinger survived the crash, but only just. His doctors told him that he'd be unable to walk again. But 9 days after the accident, he wriggled his toes, and after several operations and months of rehabilitation, he stood up on his own 2 feet. However, he was still left with injuries that would prevent him becoming a police officer. His lower left leg is paralyzed, and he has no muscle in his left shoulder. But the accident that ended his dream of joining the police would lead to a new career, which would, in some ways, be more meaningful and satisfying for him. In 1996, he qualified as a police dispatcher, a person who answers emergency calls. It is a job that gives him the chance to help people when they most need it. One day, he may be comforting someone at the scene of an accident until the emergency services arrive. Another day, he may be giving directions to someone who is lost. It is a job that gives him tremendous satisfaction. The job, Brian says, is absolutely incredible. Lieutenant Robin Schmutz, at the Toledo call center, said Brian's accident uniquely qualifies him for the job. In a way, it helps him better understand what is going through the minds of those in an emergency situation, Schmutz said. Brian had always wanted to be a police officer out on the road, but his mother said her son's main motivation was always helping other people, and she believes that he was meant to be a dispatcher. "Sometimes God moves in mysterious ways," she said. "Maybe that's where he's able to save more lives." Constructive mental power. Real constructive mental power lies in the creative thought that shapes your destiny, and your hour-by-hour mental conduct produces power for change in your life. Develop a train of thought on which to ride. The nobility of your life, as well as your happiness, depends upon the direction in which that train of thought is going. Lawrence J. Peter, 1919 to 1988. Whether Providence intervened the day Brian Gettinger was thrown from his motorcycle, we can never know. Perhaps it was also decreed from above that Julio Iglesias should not be a footballer, and that Elaine Rinaldi would be better off not playing the piano. One would have thought that any higher being would have better things to worry about than whether a man was going to spend his days as a police officer or dispatcher, or whether a man in Spain should spend his life singing as opposed to kicking a football. These incidents could, of course, just be the random result of people being thrown about in the river of life. But whatever the cause, the fact remains that Brian Gettinger did find a gift in the accident that took away his dream, just as Julio Iglesias and Elaine Rinaldi found gifts in their lost dreams. We can learn from people like Julio Iglesias and Elaine Rinaldi and Brian Gettinger, especially when we experience disappointment in our own lives. As people who had lost their life's dreams, they could have cursed heaven, or been resentful of what could have been perceived as incredibly bad luck. They remind us that sometimes all that is required to find the flip side is a willingness to let go of what has been lost, and to look ahead with expectation and conviction that somewhere in our future awaits a new, bigger, better, and perhaps more meaningful dream. Their lives are testimony that on the flip side, there is no loss without gain. Theirs is a special message. No dream is lost without the potential of being replaced by a new dream. The new dream cannot be found by dwelling on what might have been, or on what we think should have been. It can only be found by focusing on what is, what we have, and what we could be. Chapter 12. Edison's Legacy. Philosophies to Live By. If we did all the things we are capable of, we would literally astound ourselves. Thomas A. Edison. In 1997, Life magazine published a commemorative double issue, listing the 100 most important people of the last millennium. Top of the list was a man born in 1847 in the state of Ohio, USA. As a boy, he had received just 3 months of official schooling. His teacher, the Reverend Engel, had predicted that the boy would never amount to anything because he was addled. He was a daydreamer. So his mother removed him from school and tutored him herself from home. At an early age, the boy developed hearing problems, which were later attributed to scarlet fever and recurring middle ear infections. The problem worsened as he grew older, and in adulthood, following an accident on a train, he became profoundly deaf. Yet, for all his trials, the boy grew up to become one of the most prolific inventors of all time. And of all the people who have lived on Earth in the last 1,000 years, it is his life that is generally considered to have had the greatest impact on humankind's future. That man was Thomas Alva Edison. Thomas Edison had 1,093 patents registered in his name in the USA alone. He was credited with a multitude of revolutionary technological inventions, including the phonograph, the motion picture camera, storage batteries, and, of course, the electric light bulb, his most famous and arguably most significant invention. Edison played a prominent role in moving the Industrial Revolution from an age of steam to an age of electricity. More than perhaps any other man in recent history, Thomas Edison changed the world. Although Edison is most renowned for inventing the electric light bulb, historians generally acknowledge that his most remarkable invention was, in fact, the phonograph, otherwise known as a gramophone. Edison designed and built the first device that could both record sound and then play it back. It is difficult today to imagine a world without being able to record sound. And back in 1877, when Edison invented it, he could not have imagined how his invention would affect all areas of our lives, from the way we conduct business, imagine a world with no voicemails, to entertainment and leisure. Where would the Beatles or Rolling Stones be had it not been for vinyl records? And where would any of today's pop stars be without CDs or MP3 downloads? That Edison's phonograph worked without fault on his first attempt astounded its inventor perhaps more than anyone else. Edison was only too aware that most inventions need considerable refinement before they reach their potential. What made this particular device so extraordinary was not the technological breakthrough, or what it would come to mean to the world, but the fact that the world's first audio recording and playback device had been invented by a man who was profoundly deaf. Edison developed the phonograph by biting on the sounding horn and listening through the resulting vibrations in his jawbone. In fact, he claimed that his impaired hearing was actually an advantage, because by using his biting technique, he could pick up sound qualities that were virtually undetectable to the human ear. The fact that he couldn't hear, and therefore had to devise his biting method, ultimately enabled him to refine and improve the quality of the recordings far beyond that which could have been achieved through normal hearing. Seen in this light, the resulting achievement verges on the miraculous. But beyond the invention itself, Edison had demonstrated through his work a truth that would inspire future generations. Sometimes our biggest liabilities are our greatest assets. In 1988, a man called Ralph Tito was posthumously inducted into the Automotive Hall of Fame for numerous contributions to the automobile industry. Tito was an extraordinary man and, like Edison, a prolific inventor. When he was just 12 years old, he and his cousin built their first car from scratch, machining each part by hand and completely rebuilding a discarded car engine. Tito graduated from the University of Pennsylvania in 1912, proving a point to the members of the faculty who had said that he would not be capable of graduating. He then went on to become president of the Perfect Circle Corporation in Hagerstown, Indiana, a very successful manufacturer of piston rings. Tito invented a powered lawnmower, a number of lock mechanisms, and holders for fishing rods. However, his most enduring invention, certainly the one for which he is most remembered and was posthumously honored, was cruise control in cars. Ralph Tito was an extremely talented engineer, and what made his achievements all the more remarkable is the fact he was blind. At the age of 5, he lost his sight in a shop accident. Tito preferred not to discuss his disability and lived his life with an almost total disregard for it. Yet what is particularly interesting is that Tito, like Edison, was able to turn his handicap into an advantage. For example, he designed a technique for balancing steam turbine rotors used in torpedo boat destroyers. Tito had never seen a turbine rotor. He wouldn't have recognized one if he had fallen over it in the street. But in a way, he said, this helped him. Tito believed that his inability to see a rotor meant that he was unaffected and unencumbered by conventional designs. In the end, it was thanks to Tito's imagination and his highly developed sense of touch that he was able to solve a problem that other sighted engineers had been struggling with for years. The invention of cruise control was reportedly inspired when Tito became carsick while being driven by his lawyer, who apparently couldn't talk and drive at the same time. Whenever he spoke, he would subconsciously lower the speed of the car, and then speed up when it was Tito's turn to speak. Being unable to see does make people more prone to motion sickness. But it was because Tito was sensitive to motion sickness that he became conscious of the idea for an automated speed control in cars. His lawyer was driving like someone on the dodgems at a fairground, and Tito was trying his best not to throw up. But the experience inspired his idea for an automated system to maintain a constant speed while driving. Tito tinkered with the idea for 10 years before he was satisfied that he had a reliable working model, and only then did he apply for a patent. However, it was to be a further 13 years before the first car manufacturer, Chrysler, finally introduced Tito's cruise control in their new cars. Today, virtually every car manufactured in the US has cruise control as standard. It was far and away Ralph Tito's most successful invention. Yet it was his disability, his blindness, that enabled him to achieve things that were beyond the capabilities of sighted engineers. Tito developed an exceptional sense of touch through which he was able to visualize objects and processes, and this was undoubtedly a large factor in his phenomenal success in becoming one of the most thoughtful and prolific inventors in his field during the 20th century. Like Edison, Tito's biography is a remarkable testament to the Flipside. Both Ralph Tito and Thomas Edison left legacies to the world that are much greater than the sum of their inventions. Their personal philosophies of life continue to guide and inspire millions of people to pursue their dreams, even in the face of setbacks and failure. Neither man believed in the concept of disability, only that different people have different strengths and different weaknesses. The secret to their success lies in their determination to focus and work on their abilities rather than their disabilities. This attitude, we shall see, is common to virtually all people who have found the flip side. It is Edison's insights relating to setbacks and failure in life that perhaps stand out most in his personal strategy for success. Edison contended that mistakes are our best friends because we learn from them. When others saw failure, Edison saw only a valuable learning experience. Once, when asked if he was encouraged that so many of his attempts to invent the electric light bulb had failed, he replied, "I have not failed. I just found 10,000 ways that won't work." He explained to a mystified reporter, "If I find 10,000 ways something won't work, I haven't failed. I am not discouraged because every wrong attempt discarded is just one more step forward." Edison believed that mistakes in life are there to move us forward, and big mistakes move us forward that much further. He maintained that mistakes and setbacks in life are inevitable steps on the path to success. There's a much-quoted story of a junior executive at IBM having made a mistake that cost the company $10 million. When news reached the company president, Tom Watson, the young man responsible was summoned to Watson's office. The man knew that he was about to be fired, but Watson believed that one of the most critical values at IBM was the development of people. Consequently, when the junior executive asked if he was being fired, Watson quickly responded with an emphatic no. Then he added, "I just spent $10 million educating you. Why would I want to fire you now?" Mistakes often lead to surprise innovations. In 1970, Spencer Silver was employed by 3M Research Labs with the task of helping develop a super-strong adhesive. What he ended up with was glue that was considerably weaker than the one that they had already developed. It would stick pieces of paper together, but it could also be very easily unstuck. It was a complete failure, until 4 years later, when he suddenly realized that it might have some use after all. One of Silver's colleagues was singing in a church choir, and the markers he placed in his hymn book kept falling out. Remembering the disastrous glue that Silver had created, he had an idea to coat his book markers with Spencer's glue, and was very happy to discover that the markers stayed in place, but they also came off easily without damaging the pages. This discovery was the beginning of a product that is used today in virtually every office around the world: Post-it notes. Safety glass, the kind that doesn't shatter or splinter on impact, is everywhere these days, because it helps prevent serious injury. But when Edouard Benedictus, a French scientist, was working in his lab at the turn of the last century, nobody had heard of safety glass. It took an accident in his laboratory to spark the idea. Benedictus accidentally knocked a glass flask to the floor. He heard it break, but as he looked down, he stared in amazement. All the broken pieces were still clinging together. The glass hadn't shattered or even splintered. When he examined it more closely, he understood why. It turned out that the flask had been full of liquid plastic, which had evaporated, leaving a thin plastic coating on the inside of the flask. It was that thin film that had stopped the glass from shattering. Although the accident had intrigued Benedictus, he was unaware of any practical uses, and took his findings no further until he witnessed a car accident. At the turn of the last century, cars were just starting to become popular among the rich set in Paris, and the most common form of injury from car accidents at that time was cuts from shattered windscreens. Benedictus suddenly realized that his discovery presented an opportunity. Plastic-coated windscreens would prevent most of the injuries sustained from road traffic accidents. Unfortunately, Benedictus's idea was rejected by car manufacturers for the very same reason that they rejected numerous other safety innovations over the past century: cost. However, After safety glass was successfully used to prevent soldiers from being injured by shattered lenses in gas masks during the First World War, the car manufacturers changed their minds. Today, Benedictus's safety glass is used wherever shattered glass would be a danger. It may have taken 4 years and a church choir singer for Spencer Silver to find the flip side to his disaster, and it took a car accident before Edward Benedictus realized the opportunity that presented itself when he dropped the glass flask in his laboratory. But like many other scientists, both men learned and profited from one of Thomas Edison's pearls of wisdom. Just because something doesn't do what you planned it to do, doesn't mean it's useless. While Edison believed in always looking at problems from different perspectives, he never looked upon himself as a scientist like Edward Benedictus. A scientist is someone who carries out an experiment and observes what happens. Edison viewed himself as an inventor. He didn't discover things, he invented solutions. And he went out of his way to look for problems that needed solving. "I find out what the world needs," he said. "Then I go ahead and try and invent it. None of my inventions came about totally by accident." Edison searched out problems because he understood that locked inside every problem is an opportunity waiting to be discovered. There can't be many things as frustrating as standing in a queue that doesn't seem to be moving. We've all been there, standing at the back of the line at a car rental desk in an airport, while the person at the desk is chatting away to a friend on the telephone, or queuing at a checkout counter in a supermarket while the store assistant is flirting with a colleague. Imagine, though, how you would cope if you had to wait in line for 3 days. In 1995, the people in Kathmandu experienced a severe shortage of cooking gas. Sanu Kaji Stresser found himself at the back of a queue with a 3-day waiting time in order to get badly needed fuel supplies for his family. He had been forced to take the 3 days off work and then waited patiently in line for his turn to come. However, unlike the hundreds of other people, Sanu recognized an opportunity. While waiting in the queue, Sanu started to think of ways to bring alternative, sustainable sources of domestic energy to the people of Nepal. The more he thought about it, the more excited he became. Over the following 5 years, Sanu researched alternative fuels, and in 2001 he left his job at the World Bank to work full-time on his goal. He traveled to America and Europe to learn the latest technologies, and in April 2002 he established the Foundation for Sustainable Technologies, FOST, a non-profit, independent organization. Since its inception, FOST has provided sustainable technology solutions to over 1,000 households in poor rural villages in Nepal, and continues to research new technologies. FOST's website acknowledges that Nepal is facing serious problems due to widespread deforestation, environmental degradation, excessive pollution, short supply of safe drinking water, and lack of proper management of solid waste. It predicts that this trend will lead to most of the forest areas in Nepal being turned into desert, and that this would inevitably be followed by environmental disasters which will be very hard for us to face. But FOST is fighting back on behalf of the people of Nepal, educating and persuading people to manage their natural resources without creating problems for future generations. Sanu Kaji Stresser has started a movement to save Nepal from self-destruction, and his mission was inspired from the frustration of being stuck at the back of a very long queue. On the 17th of August 2008, the Mail on Sunday newspaper in the UK ran an article with the headline, "The Farmer Who Turns His Tractor Fumes into Fertilizer." It sounded like a perfect example of the Flipside in action. A problem, and as it turned out, a multifaceted problem, both financial and environmental, had revealed a massive opportunity. The article told the story of Steve Hurd, a farmer from Leicestershire in the UK, who had taken the fumes from his diesel tractor, which, when released into the air, are considered to be hazardous to humans and the environment, and literally turned them into a mineral-enriched fertilizer to improve the soil on his farm. With the continuous rise in the cost of chemical fertilizers, Hurd had known for some time that he needed to reduce his reliance on them. In 2008, the fertilizer costs for his farm shot to over £250,000 a year. The price of fertilizer is closely linked to oil prices, and oil hit an all-time high in July 2008 at $148 per barrel on the international market. Fortunately, by that time, Hurd had been working on a plan. Hurd had decided in 2007 that it was time to look for new ways to fertilize his 2,500 acres of land. As an amateur engineer, he spent 6 months and over £10,000 on a revolutionary system that uses the fumes from his tractor to enrich the soil. Diesel fumes are rich in minerals, and although they are potentially hazardous to humans, they are extremely beneficial for the soil. A similar system had been trialled on 100 farms in the USA and Canada, but Hurd had reinvented it for the British market. Hurd's innovation involved diverting the tractor's fumes to a large box on the side of the tractor, where they are cooled before being pumped via 27 pipes deep into the soil. "We placed an analyzer on the back of the tractor," he said, "which shows that 98% of its emissions go into the soil." As a result of this technique, Hurd said, the soil is less acidic. Plants create their own nitrates. They develop better root systems and rely far less on chemical fertilizers. Overall, Hurd believes that the system has reduced his fertilizer costs by 1/3, and that it produces better crop conditions leading to higher yields. His patented system, Bliss, Breathing Life into Soil System, seems to benefit the soil and the environment while offering huge financial savings to farmers. As for Steve Hurd, his invention has succeeded in reducing his costs, but it has also given him a new and potentially huge business opportunity that could transform agricultural practices in the United Kingdom. Trevor Bayliss is a well-known British inventor who first made his name through an invention inspired in response to the HIV/AIDS crisis in Africa. The first recorded case of AIDS in Africa occurred in 1982. By 1989, the disease had become rampant and was spreading across the continent like a forest fire. It was threatening to become one of the worst epidemics of the century. Bayliss was sitting in front of his TV at home in the UK when the problems surrounding the AIDS epidemic were first brought to his attention. "I was watching the TV. I had my feet up, my pipe in my mouth, and the TV controller was out of reach," he said. "I was watching this program about the spread of HIV/AIDS in Africa. I could have been watching Come Dancing or something, but by chance I was watching this program where they were saying that the only way in which they could stop this dreadful disease was by education and information, which could be best brought to Africa by radio. But there was a big problem. Most of Africa had no electricity supply, and the only other form of electricity was through batteries, which were expensive and in very short supply." This got Bayliss thinking. "I went in a dreamland," he said, "where I'm in colonial Africa, and I have a monocle, a gin and tonic and a fly swatter, and I'm listening to some raunchy number on my wind-up gramophone with a big horn on the top. And I think, hang on, if you can get all that noise by dragging a rusty nail along a piece of paper like you're using a spring, there's got to be enough power in the spring to drive a small dynamo, which in turn will drive a radio." While the TV was still on, I went into my workshop, which was the graveyard of 1,000 domestic appliances, and assembled the thing. The wind-up radio was to become Bayliss's most famous invention. The original prototype included a small transistor radio, an electric motor from a toy car, and the clockwork mechanism from a music box. Bayliss patented the idea, but it wasn't until 1994, when he was invited to show it on BBC TV's Tomorrow's World, that people began to take notice. Trevor Bayliss had created the first of several wind-up, self-energized electrical items, and, single-handedly, provided a solution to the problem of supplying information and education to people across the African continent. Like Edison, Sanukaji Shrestha, Steve Hurd and Trevor Bayliss are not scientists. They live and work in the real world rather than laboratories, and they share an Edisonian approach to problems and obstacles in life, one which is in stark contrast to the attitude of the man in the street. Most of us become frustrated by problems and obstacles when they come our way. But inventors like Thomas Edison become excited by problems because they know that problems contain opportunities. Problems were what drove Edison both in his work and in his life. When he reached the point of dissatisfaction in any area of his life, rather than becoming depressed and angry, Edison would become energized and search for the flip side. Restlessness is discontent, and discontent is the first necessity of progress, he said. Show me a thoroughly satisfied man, and I will show you a failure. Thomas Edison may be renowned for his inventions, but his belief that disabilities can be assets, problems are always opportunities, and mistakes are nothing more than learning experiences helped change the world just as much as any of his inventions. His philosophy of life continues to inspire people to innovate and invent, and when faced with a challenge, to search for the flip side. This was, arguably, his greatest legacy. Chapter 13. The Art of Seeing. Doing the Impossible. It's kind of fun to do the impossible. Walt Disney, 1901 to 1966. When told by one of his generals that his plan was impossible, Napoleon Bonaparte replied, "Impossible is a word only to be found in the dictionary of fools." A cursory glance in the past shows Napoleon knew his dictionaries. At the turn of the 20th century, it was generally considered impossible that man would ever fly. But two brothers, Wilbur and Orville Wright, disagreed, and in 1903, the Wright brothers successfully demonstrated that a man could sit in a machine that was heavier than air and fly. Although the conventional telephone was invented by Alexander Bell and Elisha Gray in 1876, few would have believed then that it would ever be possible to talk to someone on the other side of the world using a wireless handset. And if you'd suggested to someone before 1969 that man would be able to walk on the moon, they would have looked at you as if you were mad. What we learn, looking back in time, is that today's possibilities were yesterday's impossibilities. This inevitably leads to the conclusion that many of today's impossibilities may become tomorrow's possibilities, and often the people who understand this are the ones who find the flip side. In 1988, while serving in the Israeli army, Roddy Kayoff sustained an injury that left him paralyzed from the waist down. For 20 years, Roddy has been confined to a wheelchair. With irreparable damage to his spinal cord, Roddy had been told that he would never walk again. But never is another word included in the dictionary of fools. Today, Roddy can walk. He can stand up and raise himself out of his chair. He can climb stairs, and he can get in and out of cars. Watching Roddy do these things, knowing his history, is inspirational. Forget Neil Armstrong's first steps on the moon. That Roddy Kayoff is able to walk and get about without a wheelchair is nothing short of miraculous. The miracle that enables Roddy Kayoff to walk again after 20 years of being confined to a wheelchair is actually the result of the flip side of a personal accident that left another man severely paralyzed. In 1997, Amit Goffer was CEO of Odin Technologies, which developed medical imaging equipment such as MRI scanning devices. After his accident, Amit was wheelchair-bound, and it was his confinement that prompted Amit to notice an opportunity. He couldn't help but wonder why, in the technological revolution in which we are living, wheelchairs were the only solutions for paraplegics. He saw that nothing other than wheelchairs existed to enable paraplegics to get around, and he kept asking himself, why? That was the start of what became a revolutionary new product called ReWalk, the device that enables Radikayev to live without the confines of his wheelchair. The ReWalk consists of motorized leg supports, body sensors, and a backpack containing a computerized control box and rechargeable batteries. The user needs to use crutches to help with balance, and the device is operated using a remote control wristband, selecting a setting: stand, sit, walk, climb, or descend. Then, by leaning forward, the sensors are activated and the robotic legs respond. The difference that the ReWalk can make in a paraplegic's life is immeasurable. Kate Parkin, Director of Physical and Occupational Therapy at NYU Medical Center, said it has the potential to improve a user's health in two ways. Physically, the body works differently when upright. You can challenge different muscles and allow full expansion of the lungs, Parkin said. Psychologically, it lets people live at the upright level and make eye contact. When I asked Amit why he thought he had been able to see an opportunity after his accident, he answered matter-of-factly and with genuine modesty. It is natural for me. I'm an entrepreneur, and I saw an opportunity. He then explained that finding an opportunity is a bit like soup. There was no single magic ingredient. It was made up of a variety of different ingredients, not least of which was the fact that he had an incredibly supportive group of people around him, including a wonderful family made up of his wife and 3 grown-up children. Amit does admit, however, to having a positive and optimistic outlook on life, and he says he's a born entrepreneur. He instinctively looks for opportunities, and always has. Does he think that he would have developed the ReWalk had he not had his accident? His answer is a categorical no. The accident definitely drew me to the development of the ReWalk, he said, and therein lies a pretty impressive flip side. The ReWalk is a remarkable achievement that has the potential to help hundreds of thousands of people all over the world to walk again and experience a totally different quality of life. Sadly, it is something that cannot help Amit, its creator, because he does not have the full function of his arms. However, with people like Amit in the world, my guess is that the day might not be so far off when a viable solution is found to enable all paralyzed people to walk again.
This ends Disc 5.